Hello, and welcome back. I promised last time that I would start delving into the notion of mythology as it pertains to the current war in Ukraine, and how it really drives things. First, before we go into mythology as presented by Putin, let's look at what we know of the history of what he says he's trying to regain, and that is the state that we call Kieven Rus. This was a term coined in the 1800s to explain to label what came before the Mongols steamrolled the area, and the rise of Moscow. And the first question to ask is, who were the Rus? Who were the original Rus? Well, mythology, national mythology, is a tricky thing when you start looking at history. Rurik was the person who traditionally has been said to have established the Rurik dynasty, and he was said to be a Norseman. He was apparently, some people have tied him to Rurik of what's now Denmark. It's known it's not known because there are very few records going back this far. But he was a Vangarian, a Norseman from a particular area, and the Norse actually established quite a few places. They were also known as, when they settled, they were known as Normans, and the Normans were they were here. Here I mean like in Ukraine, what's now Ukraine and Russia. They were in Brittany, Normandy, named after the Normans. They took control of England and expanded that to include eventually all the British Isles. They went into northern Italy. They were basically all over the place because they were excellent warriors, and they loved to build in stone, which everybody else around Europe at the time was typically building with wood. So if you're used to attacking a wooden structure and now you're attacking a stone structure, that's very difficult to do. And this was kind of the cultural background of the person who is said to have established the Kieven Rus dynasty. He was said to have been invited in by the locals. They were familiar with the Norse because they were on a major river, and this river connected everybody from the north all the way down to the Ottoman Empire, which was, or actually at the time was still the Byzantine Empire. What was left of the Roman Empire, the eastern part of it, and that was and that connection was something that was that trade was very vital. The Norse loved to trade. I know that we talk about them pillaging and all this stuff. They go Viking and attack and raid. And what they were doing was they were actually getting goods to trade elsewhere. They would take from the vulnerable places and trade them, and what they could get, it was valuable. They trade to the people that they couldn't attack, basically, or that had something that they really wanted. And I don't know whether this is all apocryphal, right? We don't know if they were actually invited in. That's a story they tell because nobody likes to portray themselves as being uninvited. But in the long run, it really doesn't matter because they established a city of Novgorod. Well, fortress. Well, okay, it was a town. It's a fairly small settlement, I'm sure, because they just established it. And Rurik died, and his son, I want to say Oleg. Oleg the Wise, I believe his name was, took over. And Oleg the Wise was the one who established the city of Kiev. Now, in all this time, they were mixing with the locals, right? And very quickly, the Rus, the Northerners, assimilated them, but they kept the name. But they became they became Slavic over the generations. But Oleg was responsible for toppling the empire next to them, taking their stuff, and really establishing the Kieven Rus Empire. The Khazars were a step. They were kind of a horde kind of people. Turkic. I'm pretty sure they were Turkic. They were tribal. They had They had a Kagan who led them. If you had a Kagan, that meant that there was a certain ruling society that of the nomadic people who said, okay, you are a Kagan or a Khan, however you want to say it. Different languages had slightly different terms, but they basically put a family or a small tribe in charge. They were elevated to the position of this authority, and it's not the kind of thing that you saw in Europe where you had the divine right of kings and all this stuff. It was much more. It was very different. It's hard to put this into terms that a Western audience can really relate to because it's not a Western thing. And I can go into a lot of detail as to who it was who set this up and how it actually worked and all that. But let's just say there's a small tribe that basically held. They held some land directly, and the rest of it belonged to other tribes. And together they were the Khazar Empire, and they also were based on trade. They had, and it's really interesting because a Khazar trade sign, little icon thing. It was a little fork, like it was something that was actually incorporated later on in the next generation into the coinage of Rurik. It became the trizub, the trident. And that's something that's really interesting. It's rare that you would have a conquering power. Oleg conquered them. He tore down their empire, but he conquered them. But I'm not sure how much he actually. I don't think that he had the kind of intent that a lot of conquerors are said to have. His successor, at least Vyacheslav, I want to say, he was the one who adopted that Khazar sign of trade onto his own coinage. And to me, that speaks a lot about them. It was more of a, okay, we conquered you. Yes, they did conquer them, but it wasn't like there was a lot of people who were under Oleg, and there were a lot of people under the Khazars. And I'm fairly certain that a lot of the Khazar stuff was just kind of probably just brought into the into what was into the lands of Oleg. And I say that because if you look at the coin, you don't do that to a that's not something that you would expect from a conqueror. That's not what you expect from a dynasty that had, at least at that point, the idea that we are just going to crush everyone that we meet. It was, I think that that things were a lot more complex than what the history books say, just because of some of these things that we find. And none of this stuff was written down at the times, right? The legends, the mythology come from the primary chronicles, which were written a couple centuries after these events happened. So who knows exactly what transpired, except the Rus took over the Khazar lands. They conquered them. Oleg the Wise did that. Sviatoslav, I believe, took the Great. I think was his sobriquet. He kept expanding the lands, and eventually they ruled pretty much everything from the White Sea, which is Arctic Ocean kind of stuff, so all the way up next to Karelia. Not Karelia, that belonged to Sweden, which was where all the Norsemen were actually from one country, well, one state, and that was Sweden. But from that basically Arctic Ocean coastline all the way down to the Black Sea. And this was a major, like I said, a major trading route. Rivers were interstates. And it was, I believe, supposedly Oleg's wife, I think, or Yaroslav, or Sviatoslav's brother, Yaroslav the Wise. He brought Christianity, the Eastern Orthodox faith, into the empire. He did not force anyone to convert. It was a personal choice of his, but he was pagan. All these people were pagan. They were not Christian, and then there's an interaction between Sviatoslav's wife and the Roman emperor, and she came out of it baptized, and she it was Yaroslav the Wise. The reason why he's called the Wise, as far as I can tell, is because he was the one who really pushed for Christianity in the Rus Empire. And of course, I'm greatly simplifying things, but all of this happened before the Mongols came through. Moscow hadn't even been established at this point. It was all Kiev, and there's a term, and that is irredentism. That is seeking to reclaim your lost legacy, or the lost territory of a state long after it fell apart. And Putin looks at this history and he says, well, we come from Kieven Rus. Therefore, everyone who participated, the descendants of everyone who were part of Kieven Rus, belong to us, because we are the Slavic state. We are the Russian state. If your descendant, if your ancestors lived in this area, you belong to us. Your land belongs to us. And we'll talk next time about why the Ukrainians kind of disagree with that, because they have a different they have a different take on history. They date their history to a different event, and that is that event is something that really split the Russians from the Ukrainians. And I'll talk about that next time. These are important. These are not things that we learn about in school here in the U.S. The information is out there. Pretty much everything I'm saying is actually available on Wikipedia. I've read things other than Wikipedia, but the Wikipedia articles I've also read, and they're fairly good from a factual standpoint. Some of the stories, and I'm not going to get into the really Ukrainian mythology like Baba Yaga and stuff like that, and at least for the foreseeable future, because that's not the kind of mythology I'm talking about. This is about the national origins of a people. But this is what the Russians look at. This is what Moscow looks at. This is what St. Petersburg looks at and says, this is why they are a part of us. And they are irredentists. They seek to turn back that clock, to undo what history has done. As we'll see next time, that just isn't possible. And if you stuck with me this time, if you stuck with me this long, just drop a note in the comments about something that you've done to help somebody else in the last week. It's important for us to take care of each other, take care of one another, take care of ourselves. And we see so many problems arising from places where people don't do that. So I'd like to kind of build a positive feedback thing here. It's important, I think, at least. Also, I'm promoting a fundraiser that Ukraine Matters started with the 69 Sniffing Brigade, which does military aid convoys from Europe and the rest of Europe into Ukraine, delivers stuff to the front lines. They're looking to raise like 100,000 euros for several vehicles and a bunch of drones and other needed equipment. These are all things that are specifically asked for by specific frontline units. So it's things that are desperately needed. And it'd be great if somebody could kick in a few bucks on that. Link for that is below. This isn't a paid endorsement because I'm not being paid for this. It's just something that I deeply believe in. And I hope you have a great day.